Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Scott Bellis. I am the Council President of Canadian Actors Equity Association. I'm also a councillor for the BC Yukon region. I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar today. This should be a very interesting session. This is the 12th in our series of workshops and seminars funded as part of the Heritage Arts Resilience Fund. And while our sessions so far have been focused more on developing our craft and our skills as artists and addressing challenges as people who live in the performing arts, today's panel is a little different. Our discussion is a little different today. We are here today to talk about a big picture view of how our industry has changed over the last 3 years, what the future might hold for all of us working in the live performing arts moving forward. Before we get into all of that, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement statement and Equity's statement of affirmation. So I'm out here in Vancouver, and Vancouver is situated on the traditional unceded and unrelinquished lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Those people have occupied and stewarded the lands and waters of this region for many, many thousands of years. And I acknowledge the longstanding relationship that those people have to the lands and waters of this region and the care that they have provided for it. I do a lot of land acknowledgements in my role as the council president. So I just wanted to share a resource that I found for anybody who's interested in learning more about land acknowledgements. This is a book called We All Go Back to the Land by Suzanne Keepto. I found it to be an incredibly helpful resource for anybody who wants to learn more about land acknowledgements, and they're important as a tool for reconciliation in Canada. It's been great reading for me. Okay, I would like to read our statement of affirmation. It goes like this. Equity embraces an open and inclusive environment and encourages a respectful behavior that affirms the dignity of all individuals. Equity further recognizes our shared responsibility for vigilance in creating and maintaining this environment. Equity recognizes a shared history with Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. In honor of those who have gone before us, Equity commits to working toward understanding and actionable practices of reconciliation. Great, thank you very much. Okay, so Equity would also like to gratefully acknowledge the Government of Canada and the Department of Canadian Heritage as part of the Canada Performing Arts Workers Resilience Fund. That is where we got the funding for this session and all of the seminars and workshops that we have been delivering over the past few months. After the workshop, we will be sending all of you a link to complete a brief survey. Please fill out the survey. We want feedback on these workshops and your guidance as members as we move forward and plan new ones. As usual, if you have a question, I encourage you to use the raise hand option or put your question in the Q&A section, as any questions that you put into the chat may get lost in the conversations that happen there. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our panel and our moderator. So our panelists, first of all, I'd like to introduce Gideon Arthurs. Gideon is the executive director of Soul Pepper Theatre Company and the Young Center for the Performing Arts. From 2014 to 2022, he was the CEO of the National Theatre School of Canada. Prior to that, he led several major projects as general manager of Toronto's Tarragon Theatre and as executive director of the Toronto Fringe. Next up is Daryl Cloran. Daryl is the artistic director at Edmonton's Citadel Theatre and has helped grow that theatre's reputation as a world-renowned theatre in his time there. Daryl came to Edmonton after 6 years at Western Canada Theatre in Kamloops, BC. He is also a nationally recognized director, having directed at theaters across the country. Next is Ida Holmes. Ida is the artistic and executive director of Centaur Theatre in Montreal. Prior to joining the Centaur, she served as the associate director at the Shaw Festival. Ida is also a Dora Award-winning director. I now will introduce Ravi Jain. Ravi is the co-artistic director and founder of Why Not Theatre in Toronto. He is a multi-award winning artist for making politically bold and accessible theater experiences in both small indie productions and large theaters. Finally, I would like to introduce our last panelist, Laurie Marchand. Laurie is the first managing director of the National Arts Center's Indigenous Theatre. A member of the Silks First Nation, Laurie has played a key role in the encouragement, development, and production of Indigenous work, including as executive director of Western Canada. And finally, our moderator for today is Matthew Hayes. Matthew is a Canadian film critic, writer, film festival programmer, and academic. His book, The View from Here, Conversations with Gay and Lesbian Filmmakers, won a 2007 Lambda Literary Award. Okay, thank you so much for allowing me to get through all of those protocols and introductions. I will now hand things over to Matthew, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Take it away, Matthew.
Thanks very much for the introduction and for the invitation, and to Actors Equity for inviting me here today. It's a very interesting panel. I've been doing some pre-interviews with some of the people on the panel today, so it was interesting to talk to people and get their opinions, ideas, thoughts, and reflections. Obviously, we've just been through a kind of a collective trauma with the pandemic, and it's delivered a shock to everybody, really. In my work, it has. And I know that the people I speak to in live performance have really been, shaken to their core. A lot of their work was just ended for about a 2 or 3 year period, and it's been really, really complicated and really difficult. And I know a lot of you are now working to pick up the pieces. So many of you have told me that one of the main things you're seeing is that your subscription numbers are off. People are making the idea of making a season subscription, that is committing to something for an entire season, is perhaps a bit trickier, and you're seeing shifts in your audience. I'm just wondering if somebody would like to tell me how they are feeling, what their sense is of the recovery now that we're moving into a post-masking, more actual live performances, seasons happening, new shows opening. Would someone like to start talking about that? Perhaps Ida, would you like to talk a little bit about the situation you're facing at the Centaur in Montreal?
Sure, sure. I'm happy to start. Montreal is unique in the country because we have really two separate theater-going populations, and anecdotally, I can say that the French theater goers are much more ready to go back full force than the Anglophone population is. I think the pandemic was broadcast in a different way in French and in English. And I see Gideon's nodding; he was here for that. So, but we're starting to come back around, and we're starting to see people ready to, each show has gotten a little bit better through this season, and we're planning to launch our subscription series next year in April. So we're hopeful, but we're being very, very realistic about it. We're not expecting to return immediately to the full whack right away. I don't think that's realistic at this point.
Okay. Laurie, do you have anything to add about that?
Oh, I think you're mute.
We're not hearing you, Lori.
I think you're
No,
mute.
no worries.
There.
I tried
Okay.
I tried the spacebar thing and it worked when we were offline, but
Now we can hear you.
live. So, yeah, and no, just to say that that sounds pretty representative here at the National Arts Center. The subscription model is even the way we announced the season changed. We did it more interstitially rather than announcing a full season all at once. So, I think we in fact threw a bit of a something for our audiences to contend with that was outside of their regular practices. About 35% of the pre-existing subscribers have returned, and the public are buying the tickets about 48 hours in advance. So keeping us on our toes. The response is really dependent on what is on the stage. The more populist, highly accessible works have seen great audience response. But I will say that probably our programming here at Indigenous Theatre is outside of what you might call populist and easily accessible. And I have to say that to date, we've been really pleased with the response that we've seen, but it has been within 48 hours of opening.
Okay, interesting. Gideon?
Yeah, I echo what everybody's saying. I think there's a couple of other bits. I do think that things have changed in the last couple of months. It started to feel a little bit different in terms of people being more engaged and more enthusiastic. We also moved to a very controlled flow of programming announcements, so that we're announcing our season in 4 arcs. And in doing that, we essentially abandoned the subscription model because nobody can buy the big packages of plays that they used to buy. And that's a huge risk we're taking, but at the moment it's starting to pay off. The only other thing I'd add is I think this is a question perhaps of sort of pandemic hesitancy, but I think that the pandemic was also a hyper accelerator in terms of the demographic change we've been talking about for a long time in the theater. And I think that it's not just a question of whether people are comfortable coming back, it's that the people who used to make up the core audiences of theater have kind of left the building. They're now vacationing for long periods of the year. They go up to the cottage for the summer. They have less income available because they're on fixed retirement revenues. And I think that we've been aware of this big shift coming for a long, long time. So for me, it's way beyond pandemic. And it's actually kind of a question of, are we ready to respond to new audiences now, or are we going to try to squeeze out the last little bit of energy from longstanding audiences?
I remember Kamal Al-Salali, who was the theater critic at the Globe for a number of years, writing about this. I think it was in Canadian Notes and Queries, saying this, we've been talking about this for a long time. He said, this must be at least 10 years ago, saying, at a certain point, the people we are relying on to come to the theater are going to not be with us anymore. And how to put it gently, he said, everyone's old and white, and we need to move beyond that demographic really quickly. And he was saying that some time ago. So it's interesting to hear your remarks. Daryl, what's your sense at the Citadel in Edmonton?
Very, very similar. I agree with everything everyone is saying. We're in the same spot. It's a slow, cautious return for our audiences. The places where we're seeing full houses are, as Lori was saying, the more populist titles, like our Christmas Carol this year, through the roof. Like we couldn't sell enough tickets for that. Whereas, a lot of our other more challenging work or more work that we're really excited about, we're just not getting the audiences back for yet. I think the other thing that's unique to us here in Edmonton is that sort of through COVID, the downtown of Edmonton just emptied. and businesses have not come back, and that like the government buildings downtown have not, the employees have not come back. So it's an extra challenge for us just to get people downtown again to come see shows here. So not just getting them out of the house, but getting them out of the house and getting them all the way here has been a challenge throughout. So far it's taken the populist titles to get people in.
Okay, so there's a couple of things you've touched on that I want to get back to, but Ravi, I want to see if you have anything that you want to add at this point. Not hearing you.
I did it. I did that thing. Unmute myself later. Unmute myself. There it is. Okay. Yeah. So just to say, the major difference for me is I don't run a building of any kind. So I don't really have the statistics that my esteemed colleagues have. But I'll just say, Matt, just to your point about Kamal, and this probably relates to a lot of equity artists who are on this call. This conversation about audiences has been around for a long time, and there have been a lot of independent companies who have had, deep established relationships with diverse communities for a really long time. So, you think in Toronto alone, Obsidian, Native Earth, FoodGen, Cahoots, they've all had relationships with diverse communities, of intergenerational diverse communities, and that, to Gideon's point, I think institutions are maybe engaging in this question or this shift in a big way. I would say my experience right now, so I'm at the Shaw Festival, which is based in Niagara-on-the-Lake. We are in previews for Mahabharata, which is an ancient Indian epic. And we've had a ton of people come out, like the South Asian community, particularly the senior community. They're out, they're coming to see the shows. So far in previews, we've hit about 50% capacity, which is about 400-ish per show. So they're coming. I don't know if that's I don't know why. I mean, I do know why. I mean, the material and the content obviously is appealing. So that's all I have to report.
Well, it's interesting because, this is where when underserved communities are finally represented in the theater, they come out. And I'm sure people will remember when Steve Galluccio put on Mambo Italiano and Michel Tremblay for free translated into French. So it was playing in French and English. And the joke was every Italian in Montreal has seen, every Italian Canadian in Montreal has seen Mambo Italiano. They were all lining up to see the Italian community represented on stage. It was quite a moment. So you've all touched on something that perhaps would lead many to be concerned, right? And that is, you're saying the populist stuff. People are coming to see the populist stuff. People are coming to see the familiar stuff, the crowd-pleasing stuff, if you will. And the riskier stuff, the insinuation, of course, is that the riskier stuff is not drawing as many people. And of course, that will lead some people to say, is this going to lead to less risk-taking on the part of artistic directors and theater groups and companies across the country? So I know there's always the best artistic directors find a way to balance the really populist stuff and then we'll have a few risks here too. So we know that the numbers will sort of pan out. But how much of a consideration is that for you? Are you concerned that you're going to be maybe self-censoring? You're going to be pulling back from taking risks on new work?
I can start on that. I don't think there's a pulling back. There's no place to go. Like there's no there if you start to pull back. As Gideon mentioned, the traditional audience, or what we call the traditional audience for some of the big institutions, is aging out of coming to the theater, and that the demographic of places that are changing, and certainly theaters in a city like Centaur Theater. I can't limit my idea of who the audience is. I have to actually open my idea of who the audience is and who it might be and how I might encourage them to come. And at the beginning, it might be, the Italian audience comes from an Italian play, and then the the Lebanese audience comes from a Lebanese, it may start that way, but I'm hoping and I believe that the way forward is to say, we find the way to tell stories that everybody feels connected to in some way and can find themselves on stage. Somebody said theater should look like the bus. And since I take the bus so much to go to work, that's the goal that we have here. You know, Montreal doesn't have Fujian. It doesn't have, we have Black Theatre Workshop, which is an incredibly powerful entity in the city, but it's the only dedicated, ethnically dedicated company here based in Montreal. So a place like Centaur, we are, I guess, taking up the place to say, how can we make space for the most number of voices without just saying that just because it's a play about an Italian gay man in his 60s, it's only for Italian gay men in their 60s. And so that's the conversation I'm trying to start with the audience, because I think that's the challenge of going forward is not about who the audience used to be, it's how do we build the audience of the future. That's what we're, I think, all looking at, or at least I am. I know that's what I'm spend my sleepless nights trying to imagine where they are.
Okay, Gideon, do you have anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts to add, because I agree, of course, Vidita, but I'd first like to reframe the presumption that it's the populist stuff that sells, and maybe propose that audiences are stating more clearly what it is that they need right now. And part of what they need is maybe some lightness, some joy, some feeling of togetherness. And I don't think that the same old adage can apply that there's kind of serious real theater and not serious commercial or populist theater. I think we really have to be listening to our audiences and meet them where they are. And I think that to add to that, I think that in general, and you know, many of us around this table are sitting here representing institutions. We have to do a much better job of standing next to them in the conversations that they're having and proving that we can be useful to them as they sort out what it is that they need to sort out, and not be a place where maybe in the past we would explore a specific aesthetic, a specific approach, a specific voice. We need to be a place now that is a place of social rehabilitation. And that means listening to what the communities we are serving need and making really, really bold choices to serve those needs, instead of thinking about how do we balance out something that'll sell a ticket and something that will fulfill a kind of arbitrary artistic objective.
Okay, interesting. Daryl, do you have anything you would like to add about that at all?
I totally agree. I think both what Gideon and Edith have said is totally true, and what we're facing here as well. Like, definitely, like there is no turning back. Like, we are our job, you know, as the sort of big regional theater for this area, like risk has to be part of who we are. And I think the way Gideon framed it is totally right. That like it's not necessarily that audiences just want populist. It's the conversations, the feedback we're getting constantly is about, you know, people that are looking for a night of joy, or a night of you know, an uplifting experience, or how we frame that. And what, you know, and over this year or next year, as we're encouraging people back to take the risk again, to get back in the habit of coming to theater, if we can do that by providing joy, or providing that kind of experience, then it only gets people more comfortable with coming to back to sort of the experience of, you know, I'm going to take a risk on a thing that I don't know because I trust this experience. Certainly, you know, talking about sort of demographics as well, I'd say like one of the things we're most excited about or proudest of here is, like, over the last 5 years, our kind of median age of audience has dropped about 15 years. So finding that connection to a younger audience, or to an audience who haven't found themselves represented on our stage earlier, that shift is definitely happening. And so how to continue that conversation is a big part of our focus, for sure.
Okay, interesting. So I don't see any musicals about the pandemic in any of the future programming here. Too grim. Ravi, anything you want to add?
I lost my point. I was looking at the chat actually. Give me a second.
So, I mean, one of the things that you discussed with me, and I think that the some theaters now, I believe, are adopting this idea of pay what you can. Is that something that theaters are doing? Like larger theaters are doing what smaller theaters. I remember in London years ago, when I lived in London, England, there were pay what you can days. Because a lot of people were broke. It was you know, when the Britain was really was sinking, and that brought in people who might not otherwise go to the theater. Are those kinds of models, are those kinds of ideas being brought into the institutional theaters that some of you represent? Like, are you doing that at Soul Pepper or the Centaur?
Can I actually, just before we go there, I just want to piggyback on the point. I remember my point, which is in terms, I think defining risk is important. Like, what do we mean? Because what is a risk? A risk for me might not be a risk for someone else. And I think that one of the things that's really been clear out of this pandemic is like, who is telling the story? Like, that's for a long time was a perceived risk for an audience. That was a perceived barrier, was, oh, well, if it's not a white man telling this story, no one's going to come. And so what do we mean by risk? So I would say, you know, who is telling the story and how the story is told, I think are, you know, questions that, you know, to Gideon's point, and how do we engage with this audience in this current moment that we're in, is I think harder questions that we're all asking. And I think that the potential that I see now, because a lot of leadership has also changed in the last, like the leaders on this call, you know, it's very new, it's very exciting. And across the country, we've seen a lot of change. And I think that, you know, in terms of what's next and the major opportunity ahead of us is partnerships with smaller companies, smaller people who haven't had the resource or the opportunity to access the audiences, because there's also a real disconnect between who has access to an audience. And really, it's about marketing dollars, it's about size, and it's a building. It's really hard as an independent company to have a consistent relationship with an audience outside our newsletter. And so often if we partner with Soul Pepper and do a show there, people think it's a Soul Pepper show, or we're here at Shaw and they think it's a Shaw show. And it's not. I mean, it is, because we're in partnership, but we're the engine. And so all that to say, looking for ways to partner, looking in this landscape of massive change leadership, how can we actually work together to share those audiences in ways that weren't happening before, to really just create more opportunity for more voices, more ways of working together? I think that in the landscape, I've seen more happening. And I think that is, it's a really important thing for us all to really continue to push and go further with.
Okay. Lori, do you have anything that you want to touch on specifically around this issue?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the work that Indigenous theatre programs is not exactly what you would categorize as populist or kind of in the easy listening vein. So much like Ravi, but how we've contextualized our work here at the National Arts Centre, and frankly, when we were working in Western Canada Theatre as well, it's relational, right? We are in a relationship with our communities who we hope to invite in as audience members. So it's taking a look at the relationship with the audience and what is the work that is going to serve the audience. And in terms of thinking about what's on our stage, what is our stage, how are we creating the work, who's telling the story, those are all major questions that are facing all of us, I would suggest, as both artists and producers. So I can talk about accessible ticket strategies for sure. We have a ticket price here for, we call it On My Relations for Indigenous folks. It's a $15 ticket. It's the same price as the under 30 ticket. We've seen great uptake on those ticket offerings. I know that our colleagues here at Great Canadian Theatre Company, I know companies around the country are looking at, and I think Soul Pepper is one of them, not to speak for you, Gideon, but to basically pick your own price. Not only pay what you can, but pick your price. Subscription models that are more like a membership model, saying with a monthly fee, these are the shows that you have access to. So I think fundamentally, we're dismantling the infrastructure that assumed a certain type of work, a certain type of relationship, and asking a lot of really important questions that thankfully are in front of us now. But maybe we could have asked them earlier in our Canadian theatre performing arts landscape, but we're asking them now. And how we respond to those questions is foundationally important to the relationship with the work and the audience and whose story we're telling.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like this is a very healthy period of experimentation then and reevaluation. So
yeah. There's even at Giuseppe in Montreal, we haven't tried it yet, but I've been keen. Pay Your Age is the gig that they've got going, which I think is really it's playful and fun. So
that's
you
a
make
great
a choice. So that means nobody old will come. Yeah.
Well, then you have the seniors discount. You must.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else on things you're doing around ticket prices that might be trying to reach out? Because as people are commenting, people's budgets are tight. Everyone is feeling with inflation. Everyone is feeling the pinch. And so a night out becomes more of a thing that people are going to think 3 or 4 times about. So are there things that are being done about that any of you are doing, kind of experimenting with, like at the Citadel? Do you have a pay what you can day, Daryl?
Yeah, we do a pay what you choose program, and I guess we've tried to be more intentional with it too and provide more access. I mean, certainly when it was originated years ago, it was a kind of one night and everybody lines up and you wait in line for a few hours to get it. So we've gone to a much more of an online lottery system where there's 4 or 5 different days in every show that everyone has access to, so you don't have to come and physically be in the building to do the pay what you choose program. I guess we're also trying to be really intentional in not only programming work, like we have a musical coming up called Prison Dancer, which is an all Filipino musical about a prison in the Philippines. And so part of it is create a community access price and then reaching out to the Filipino community here in town, so that it's not just making the price, but actually doing the outreach to try to build that conversation with community so that they know it's part of it. So that's been something we've been trying as well.
Okay. Yes, Gideon.
Sorry. Go ahead, Gideon.
Yeah, just to add to what Daryl said. I mean, I think price is a thing. It's a real legitimate concern, and it's going to get worse as the economy gets worse. But people will still spend large amounts of money on things that really interest them and things that really matter to them. Concerts across Canada right now are selling gangbusters. People want to go see live music shows, big, huge scale ones that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. People want to go to, really fancy restaurants and spend $300-400 in a night. Not everybody, but those parts of the discretionary economy are doing okay. And I think it's a really good lesson for the theaters to say, how do we make ourselves a thing that people really, really want to come to? And again, it's about all of the things. I mean, Laura, you put it perfectly. The relationship, being in relationship with our audiences, is saying, how do we put work on our stages and create an experience that people say, absolutely, you're paying $50 for this makes sense because it's going to be a once in a lifetime thing. I'm really excited to see not just how the content changes, but the container changes, how our theaters become a place where people come all the time and they're hanging out and they're dating or they're meeting new people or they're dropping off their kids. And on top of that, seeing a show that means something to them.
Yeah.
But one of you got to start a singles night.
We did.
Oh, you did that already.
Well, we
Okay.
got a date night. We have a date night going.
The singles night, you'll get lots of people coming to that. Right?
Yeah. I think I'd love to hop on to what Gideon said, though, because I think that's the actual proposal of that we all have to reconnect to, because for the last 3 years, the idea of gathering at all was so anathema to everybody. And they're ready to gather for, like you say, big concerts and things like that. But we have to make the case that theater is a fundamental part of our social experience. And we have to make that case with our communities in a really active and profound way, and make it, it's the work we have to do to rebuild because people are out of this habit and they don't actually understand, I don't think, that the price of a concert ticket is a for-profit situation where that price doesn't pay, the show is paid for 100 times over by the price of that ticket. A theater ticket doesn't pay for the show that people see. Like, the price of that ticket doesn't pay for what they're looking at. And so we have a different connection to make around price and people and what it is that we're doing. And so we have to go back to the idea, and Quebec is a really good reminder of that. There is a social mission attached to French theater that they have successfully built with their public, with the French public. And I think it's it's legit. The people believe that it's necessary to, as a Quebecer, to go to the theater. And I think that and they even come to English theater too. I mean, we learned that with our show with Théâtre d'Aujourd'hui. We did a co-pro with them and put the audience on the bus, and everybody's like, no one's going to get on the bus. I'm like, everybody got on. I was surprised. Everybody got on the bus and went to the other theater. And so I think that we have to be able to figure out and be, like, aesthetically courageous to find the ways where we can reconnect to that sense of necessity for what we do, that we're necessary to your life as a citizen in the world.
That is really fascinating, because as somebody who grew up in Edmonton and moved to Montreal to study, it really impressed me when I'm here, when I have these conversations about culture, whether it's theater or visual arts, or especially cinema, which I've mainly written about as film, is that in Quebec, the Quebecois really see cinema as an essential part of their lives, and they wouldn't think twice. If you went to study cinema at a university, that wouldn't be thought of as odd. Whereas I had to do a lot of explaining when I was doing that degree, when I would go back to Alberta for holidays. And you just touched on it, Ida. That's a really large war to win, is how do we make people see theater as being something really that they would just naturally, like, let's go and see an exciting show. Let's try this out. Let's see something. When I lived in New York, we went to the theater kind of every week type thing. It was just part of living there. It's such a famous theater town. But how do we make theater a really crucial part of the cultural life? And I think that's a very large thing to ponder.
I would say, in that question, what needs to be teased out is the where of that for people, the arts is culture, and that happens, cultures across the world. They tell stories, they sing songs, they dance, they do things called theater that might not look like the theater that happens in those places where we're saying are essential. And it's essential for certain people. And I think that's part of the thing, is like building relationships is also it requires a way of embracing other ways of thinking of what theater can be and what that is. So even to Gideon's point of just hanging out, well, that's kind of a kind of theater, using the lobby, seeing that as a welcome space for a lot of people. These places, you know, you walk by these buildings and you don't know what they are. And so I think a couple things I would say, just going back even to the last question, how do we establish relationships and on the terms of the people we're trying to establish relationships with? So even the way we get the word out, like, so I can speak specifically with the Indian community, you know, grocery stores are a really important way to get the word out, not Facebook ads. Even the selling of tickets can be done through grocery stores. It's cash, it's dirty, it's really hard to follow, but that's how people go and see things in different communities. And every different community has a different way of doing things, and they have different hubs and places where you know, you get the word out. And so I think as we're building more relationships, and that's where, again, I think partnerships with institutions is really important. And again, going back to the equity, whoever's on this call listening to this thing, I mean, it's the artists who are from those communities who live those lives, who know where the shit happens and how to connect to the aunties and uncles and whomevers. And how do we open up that dialogue? Because I think for a long time, producing has been so separate from the people in the building, which is the artists and the company that you're working with. And how do we, again, how do we just get more, how do we support each other more and recognize we all have the same shared goal?
I think those, you know, those are really, really interesting points, Ravi. I mean, how do you build an audience? On that note, I would like to raise another question, and all of you, we've all discussed how crucial word of mouth is. That's what will make a show sell out, right? And this is obviously very personal for me. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, I should probably say, in Montreal, we had 4 alternative weeklies, 2 in English, 2 in French. I was an associate editor of the Mirror. It's obviously very personal for me. I was the film critic, and I wrote about theater for the Globe and Mail. Those 4 weeklies are gone. I haven't written for the Globe in years. Their freelance budget has been slashed. They don't always review things. I used to review every Cirque du Soleil show, and a lot of theater I reviewed for them. Not anymore. What we faced is the real collapse of thousands of journalists laid off. And usually the first thing that, unfortunately, that publishers and editors see as dispensable is the arts, is culture. They think, well, the theater companies don't place that many ads, so we'll just skip that, right? And it's been devastating for so many people I know who wrote about culture, but also for the artists themselves to go and get a Canada Council grant when they don't have any reviews of their books or their shows or whatever. It's been really, it's just been a very trying time. Post Media, which owns most of the newspapers in the country, 66% of it owned by a New Jersey hedge fund, if you can imagine. I don't know if there's any kind of situation like that in any of the Western industrialized democracy where so much of the media in Canada is owned, print media is owned by a foreign entity, if you can imagine. They've announced another round of cutbacks after taking millions of dollars in subsidy from the Canadian government. Sounds like Air Canada, doesn't it? And there's a bit of a protest movement here in Montreal. They're trying to stop the cuts from happening. There's only 41 people left on staff at the Gazette. Ida, as I'm sure you know, I think we discussed this, Steve Galluccio, who is a pretty well-known playwright in Montreal, I would say, has had some hit shows, Mambo Italiano, which of course was subsequently turned into a film, which did quite well. I don't think the Gazette even sent somebody to interview him or review it, right?
They at the last minute, Brendan Kelly, out of his own diligence, called Steve and said, I'm going to find a way to interview you, but they didn't, the last 2 shows they haven't reviewed. And I don't think they're going to review. I don't know what the future holds on that, but we've been fighting with them. We even, for the last show of last season, we had bought an advertorial in the Gazette in an attempt to boost some interest, and then they didn't review the show. So So even with buying advertising doesn't actually guarantee anything anymore. So it's a really, it's a shift. It's a fundamental shift. I think you're absolutely right. There should be a commission on how much public money goes to newspapers that are owned outside of the country, and how that's managed, for sure. I don't think that'll ever happen. But it's a shift in the way also, though, the way who gets to have the right to say what is good and bad as well. Like there's also that, there's a different conversation around how do you, like you say, word of mouth has become something that actually happens online to a certain degree, as well as opposed to around the cooler at the office, since nobody's at the office anyway. So I think everything is upheaved, but it's tragic for the conversation with the arts in the country, because the conversation between the critical community and the arts is how we go back and forth. We don't always agree, but we need the conversation. That's part of that thing of saying it's important. You know, when I did a show at TNM, there were about 15 reviews in Montreal, and online, on TV, on the radio, you know, like everywhere. It was absolutely, you know, and so you got a broad range of opinions about that show as well. So you weren't also depending on one person with a pen to decide whether your work has worth. And so I think it's a bigger conversation around how do we broaden the conversation with the arts and the public.
Okay. Anyone else on grappling with a post-print journalism world?
I just add very, very briefly that I think we need to frame it in the overall discussion of the public's failing trust in institutions in general, and that includes cultural institutions. And so I think it is a tragedy. I miss really good arts journalism. It's harder to reach a certain segment of the audience, but it's a lot more complicated than saying people should, newspapers should have more reviewers. It's actually what is the role that a theater, what is the role that a newspaper, what is the role that a university, what is the role that government plays in the life of communities. And theater folks need to be really part of rebuilding trust with these structures that we've chosen to organize ourselves. And that's a huge responsibility. And then maybe the newspapers take notice and say, oh yeah, well, actually we do need some people working that beat, because that beat is relevant and that beat matters to people.
Yeah, and I should just also note that I recognize fully that for a long time, legacy media in Canada really ignored communities of color and Indigenous communities. They were completely underserved, and recognized that and wrote about it and protested it. The people running the newspapers were overwhelmingly white and male, it's been a long-standing problem in journalism. The institution was one of the last to diversify before it started to fall apart. So there's that too. You're right. There's a larger trust problem with institutions. One of the, Lori or Ravi, do you have anything you want to add on that point?
Thanks, Matthew, for bringing that up. It's I think way more effective coming from you than from me. So thank you for sharing that experience. I will say also, ahead of that, as most people know, I mean, I've been here now in Ottawa for 5 years, and part of that was in Kamloops for 19 seasons. And so the experience of working outside of a major center too was also very different than working inside Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal, or, so the issue of reviews and the importance that they were held and who was doing the reviewing, and again, it's just another perspective of a show, to making sure that those doing the reviews are also, being respectful and being intentional and honest about, the fact that they're offering their own opinion that may not coincide or align with the experience of the artist telling the story. But I also wanted to add, maybe in a constructive way. I mean, I see in the chat a joke about TikTok. Our Indigenous community loves Facebook. We love Facebook. I won't comment on TikTok, but doing things like, for instance, rather than reviewers relying on, no, I'm gonna totally mess up on the term, influencers. Yeah, I've got that right.
You got it. You got it.
Influencers have become maybe perhaps the new reviewers, and engaging with folks who are engaging on social media in a real-time exchange is very interesting, and I have to say I'm quite curious to see where it goes.
Well, now we're all supposed to be off TikTok. But,
That's
yeah,
right.
they say in books publishing, they say if you want a book deal, the publishers, they're all on Twitter, but the readers, especially young women, going on TikTok and saying you got to read this book. TikTok has been turning books into bestsellers, so I find that really quite interesting. And
I will just add the Indigenous art market. Indigenous, so we host an Indigenous art market here annually. It's 4,000 people fill the NAC, predominantly Indigenous. It's amazing, but a lot of the artists are also on TikTok selling their wares. So
that's great.
I don't know.
Are there any social media success stories that any of you would like to share, or are any of you finding that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that any of these things are working really, really well, or not, or is not, is social media not filling the gap that's been left with less reviewing?
I don't think it's I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's just part of a strategy. It's become part of an overall strategy of how do you get the message out? How do you make contact with the audience and find them and grow the audience and find a new audience? And it's stuff that thankfully can turn to people who can know what's working and what doesn't. Say you need more things like this, and in terms of ads, more ads like this, less ads like that. And it's very reactive. You're constantly responding to it, as opposed to going, here's the ad for the show, here's the poster, here's the thing, we're done. It's a much more organic process, which goes to a little bit to what Gideon was saying about figuring out how to talk to the audience, to listen to them and how they want to be connected with.
And just to be really clear, real deal social media marketing costs a fortune. I mean, it is to get an influencer, a real deal influencer interested in your work, to come to your show, you might be spending $5,000 or $10,000 for them to come and engage in a meaningful way. So I think it's important to separate out the two things. I think being part of an active conversation online through social media is one thing. We will never win the metrics game of being able to sway real sales on social media. And it's also really hard because the product that moves online is the product that you can just buy with a click. Ours, you have to buy and then show up and then consume. And it's like the process is really long from that point of sale. If you have an influencer saying buy even this book, but let's say a hair product or whatever, you click it, it shows up in the mail a couple of days later, you don't have to do anything. So I think that having authentic conversations online with lots of communities, awesome. As Ravi said, though, not every community does that, engages in that way either. So, but trying to compete with the mega corporations who have millions of dollars going into social media for advertising, don't even try.
Yeah, an independent film producer at TIFF a few years ago was on a panel and was talking about like, how do we get people to come and see our independent features? And he was really blunt and said, like, I would, I think that this is just overblown. You can have 150,000 likes on a Facebook page. It doesn't mean 150,000 people are going to come and see your upbeat opening night of your film. It's not how it works. And you don't really. It's very easy to just click on something. It's another thing to make the evening out to the theater. So it's kind of more complicated than that. It's trickier than that. Harnessing social media is complicated. I did want to bring up an issue, and that is the issue of it's obviously tied into the pandemic and also but geography. Urban centers have been impacted, obviously, really tremendously by the pandemic. When you wander around downtown Montreal and old Montreal, I definitely feel it. And I was in Edmonton at Christmas, and the downtown has been in crisis for years. It's gotten much worse post-pandemic. Some of my friends who work downtown have just insisted that they're going to maintain working from home because they don't even feel safe in the middle of the day in downtown Edmonton. Toronto, I felt, I was there last summer, and I must say, it felt like it was a little bit on fire. The downtown I was in the village, and it was just crazy. People were really eager to get out and have fun. And I've never seen so many drag shows. Every restaurant, there was a drag show going on. It was like quite crazy. So different cities are bouncing back while others are not. I think Edmonton's downtown felt particularly significant. And I'm just wondering, perhaps we'll start with you, Daryl. But I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you're having with city officials about safety, security, trying to get the downtown back so that, because the Citadel is right in the heart of downtown Edmonton.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Like I touched on it earlier, just the sort of exodus from the downtown during COVID just hasn't, people just haven't come back in the same way to like the office towers and that kind of thing. Like the best example being we had a second cup in our building, and it was like, I think it was the second busiest second cup in Canada because we had so many people going through the building, going to office work and that kind of thing. And now it's closed because nobody's here. And certainly part of that too then is just is how we take care of our community downtown, both like community members that need support services. That's a big sort of part of, Edmonton is very cold. And so people are constantly sort of coming in to look for warmth and to look for safety, and sort of how we work with public officials to provide that. And then for patrons, that there's lots of concern around safety for patrons. And, do I want to come all the way downtown to a show? Will I feel safe? So trying to balance that is certainly a big part of it. I mean, I like connected to that, sort of watching in the chat, sort of Simon's conversation around sort of experiences as well is a big part of it. Like, certainly, I think, one of the things we're missing now at the Citadel is like, not only did we lose the second cup, but we used to have a restaurant here, and that closed during COVID. So how to animate the building in a way that it's more than just like, I show up, I park, I go upstairs, I sit quietly in my seat for 2 hours, I watch the play, I go back downstairs, I drive home. Like, part of like how the Citadel thrives is building an experience for patrons. That's more than that, more than just the play. What's the conversation before the play? How do we connect with community? How do we connect with other patrons? So building that's the rebuild we certainly have to do, because most of that got lost during partnerships and people that moved out of the building during COVID.
Do you mean that your patrons can park? That's a big one for Montreal. There's literally no place. If you want to drive here, you really, I don't know, you need a crystal ball. And and bring a lunch, because you might not actually even get to where you're going to.
That's true. Yeah.
It's a really big, yeah, people, I wish I could build, if I could build a parking lot, I really would.
Yeah, although you guys are the Centaur is well placed on the subway line, so the metro
Yes,
serves
absolutely.
serves
But
it.
yeah, but a big, yeah, it's a big conversation to have with the audience, to say you can get here, you just don't need to bring your car.
Yeah, Ida, did you want to add anything else to conversations around?
No, I'm just really just very jealous of Soulpepper and Citadel that have parking lots. I find that very exciting as a thought.
When I spoke with Sarah Polley about her new film, Women Talking, which is actually nominated for a couple of Oscars. The Oscars obviously happening on Sunday night, I believe. Her process for making the film was actually, she said it was kind of felt like the theater in a lot of ways. There was lots of rehearsal. They had to actually do a lot of rehearsal in masks because of the pandemic and in open spaces. And so she said that was a really interesting experience too. But one of the things that she talked to me about and stressed was, and she's been talking about it in a number of interviews, is that she really wanted to change the way in which film is often done. It's a director kind of as God, not always listening to everybody. And also, she said, I didn't want to create a situation where, like so many film shoots, where people are working 18-hour days, that's somehow seen as normal. That is just almost abusive, that people have to work these terrible shifts. And it's all, the show must go on at any cost. And people do it because they want the career so badly that they'll put up with these situations that are really quite awful. She wanted to make sure that people felt safe, that people felt comfortable, that people had a reasonable night's sleep, and that people could see. She wanted to see her own children at the end of the day, and she wanted to make sure other people also had that ability. Now, I've talked to a lot of people in the theater over the years, often for articles for Equity Quarterly, Actors Equity Magazine, and they've said that work-life balance is really shitty in Canadian theater. People are just like burned out. And I'm wondering if the pandemic might be providing, maybe some of you can let us know, is it providing a break in that? Are we going to work towards a more serious approach to a work-life balance for the artists working in the theater?
We have to. I mean, we can't go on living like this, as to quote Carol Frechette. I feel like it's entirely possible to work in a different way by just simply looking at, not treating everything as the same, and not assuming that a play with 150 pages gets the same amount of time as a play that has 75 pages. And a play with one person in it doesn't need to work for 8 hours in a day for one person to be in the room acting for 8 hours. And a play with 50, we have to actually become better at our jobs of going, what is this? What does it need? How do we make it? And I think I don't think I haven't talked to anybody that isn't thinking about that in really concrete terms, and especially around people with families. The idea that you have a life in the theater where, I just don't know how you do it. I certainly couldn't have had kids growing up in the dance world and theater world the way I came through. I'd have been a terrible parent. That's why, but it's not the reason I'm not a parent, but there's other things that we won't go into here. But I do see for people with families, it's got to be coherent, or we'll lose the best people. That's the other thing. What people found out in the pandemic is there was other places to take their creativity and their energy that pays them better and gives them better chance for a work-life balance. And so if we care about our industry, we have to care about our people.
Anyone have it? Daryl?
Yeah, just to build on that, and I see Gideon put it in the chat as well. It's given us an opportunity to really challenge the assumption about how theater is made. and to look at like that we're doing 5-day rehearsal weeks now for a number of our projects, and to have a 2-day weekend like is incredibly civilized, like, and allows people to have a bit of a work-life balance. I mean, the other big part of this for us and for lots of regional theaters has been to really look at the understudy process and how that works. Like, you know, a lot of that grew out of the necessity of COVID, but like now we're in a place where because we got that machine going, now we understand how to do it, and now we can budget for it, and now we can be in a place where somebody can take a day away because they're feeling ill, or because they have to go to a funeral, and we don't have to say, you know, anymore that sort of practice of like, got to keep going, you can't go to your friend's wedding, you can't be a part of this. Like, so allowing that kind of balance are all small steps, but towards like actually a way of creating work in a much healthier way together.
Yeah, I remember some artists just saying, theater artists and film artists entering into a period of work, just saying, well, I have no life now. Well, just the next 6 months, I'm just not going to have any life. That's it. It's just going to be the show, and that's it. Gideon, you mentioned in the chat that there are things that you're doing in terms of rehearsals.
Yeah, we've changed a lot of the ways we've worked, both on the admin side and on the artistic side. We've reduced from 6 days to 5 days a week in terms of rehearsals. We're no longer doing 10 out of 12s. I think that actually the big breakthrough at Soul Pepper was the fact that sometimes we just had to cancel shows, and then it turns out that the show doesn't have to go on, and that's kind of a mind-blowing notion. So when there was COVID or COVID, you know, possible contact, and we had to cancel a show, we canceled it, and then guess what? We just got up the next day and kind of kept going. So you really challenged that fundamental myth in the past year, and that means now we can look at all the systems that fed into it.
I'll just piggyback with a different perspective too here for, you know, creators, and I think that this is where actually equity plays a major role in this conversation, because it's about how we make the work. What is the process of making work? So there are people who don't, like, I love Ida's example of, you know, 150 pages versus 70 pages. There are people who create in ways that don't have any pages. And so how do we create in ways, how do we change the creation model? And I remember for a long time, Indigenous folks really struggled with equity because the processes of creating work, the relationships that were being established were not necessarily the same terms that equity would force us to abide by. And so I think that it's super important that we, in the openness of this new time, is that we're more transparent about how we want to work, and that we're more creative about how we find ways to support the work that can support the artists better, and then therefore make more innovative work. It just kind of ties back to risk. If the process is the same, the work will be essentially the same. So how can we create the mechanisms and containers to think differently about the how? And equity has a major role in that, because, you know, we work with equity to make those contracts. So I think the more that we can be flexible and open and think about different ways of working, you know, just to Ida's point about French Canada has a very different process, and the flexibility they have with their timelines and their contracting allows for them to have a very healthy lifestyle, a very long process, and it creates very different work. And English Canada is often really stunned when they hear the statistics of that. So really all of us thinking harder about creating those mechanisms to support different ways of how we make the work.
Very interesting perspective. Laura, do you have anything you'd want to add about that?
Sure. I'm seeing my friend Valerie Planche's note in the chat, and for sure, you know, I have to say it's something that I'm really proud of out of the last bit of negotiation is the inclusion of Article 10 in the Canadian Theatre Agreement. And of course, it does apply to PACT members and equity members, but I think it reflects the broader discussion in terms of exactly what Ravi was talking about, is just conceptualizing different ways of working. And so I think that Article 10 and the rehearsal discussions we were able to have in the last round of negotiations, we're moving in the right direction. Thinking outside of the box, trying to be more representative, trying to set up a way that we're addressing systemic barriers. And like I said, I'm really proud of where that discussion went, and the forward movement we were collectively able to achieve in that Article 10 committee, which was both equity and PACT members from diverse communities in that room, and trying to figure it out. So I think that's the way forward. I think we need to figure this out going forward together. And just as an example, I don't think I'm talking outside of school. I mean, the National Arts Center is a very colonial institution. A lot of unions and a lot of infrastructure that can use a little bit of, we'll say, a little massaging, if not full destruction, breakdown, tear down, start again. So when we were doing the breathing hole, some of the work happened in community, because as I was saying, the relationship is with community and being cognizant of whose story we're telling. It's a story that was shared with us from a knowledge keeper in Joe Haven, and the drumming knowledge, the costume knowledge, the land-based essence of the story was in that community. And so some of the work actually took place in community with food and interactions and community engagement. And we managed to find a way to build that language learning into a process that respected the relationship between PACT and equity and our the membership. But it did take some willingness to understand that the work we were creating was something not anticipated by the existing agreement. And the more we can build in that adaptability and responsiveness to the type of work we're creating, it's fantastic. So that it's, we're not setting up a paradigm where people have to choose to be a powwow dancer or a theater artist, where we recognize that we can be both. Yeah.
So what you're saying is the answer lies in taking those risks with process and with
absolutely taking risks. I think that's almost where the conversation started, is are we still willing to take risks? I think we are born risk takers, and I think that all of us have choices. We have chosen to work in theater, and along with that choice, I think we acknowledge that we're risk takers, and that we want to push the boundaries, that we're not accepting the status quo, and that a lot of the art is helping us build and move towards a better society. And so working together collectively through collaboration, through consensus building, consultation, to me, that's the only way that we're going to move it forward.
Okay, that's great, and it's so optimistic. So I hate to take the conversation in this turn, but I have to bring this up, and that is there's been a huge paradigm shift as I see it in our culture, and that is that somewhere along the line, it was somewhere around like The Sopranos and The Wire, where the pandemic made it even more extreme, and Netflix and streaming services made it more extreme. Television, which had once been the medium you went to die in, was just awful. Television was, someone once said it's fitting it's called a medium because it could never be very good. I mean, the 70s, other than a couple of great shows, a couple of great sitcoms, most of television was really dreck. Television has now become the it medium. I mean, there's such good writing on television. There's such amazing performances. There's such amazing shows. I'm actually quite blown away, and I can't keep up with it. As people are saying in the industry, there's now too much television. And as everyone's obviously noted, I'm sorry, I'm stating the obvious, but during the pandemic, people's habits changed. A lot of people staying inside because they felt safer. And you can watch extremely good shows on these streaming services. And I'm just wondering, how much time do you spend thinking we're competing with something that's gotten really, really good? People can have a good experience. The televisions have gotten bigger and better. And so the home experience has become enhanced in a way that I feel is unprecedented, actually. It's kind of a golden age for television. So how many of you feel, gee, we're really having to compete now with this shift in television? Daryl? Or sorry, I'm sorry, Gideon, you had your hand up, sorry.
I would say just a couple of different things. One is, you know, you can take data for what it's worth, but a lot of the kind of studies that people are doing on audience behavior are really confirming what you're saying. But actually, the number one reason that people aren't coming to live events, it's not cost, it's not distance, it's not that they think it's too serious. It's literally the couch. People are answering on the survey, why don't you go? And they say, because my couch is too interesting. And I think that the way I interpret that is a kind of social atrophy. It's a kind of an ease of access. I can get whatever I want to eat, whatever I want to drink, whatever I want to smoke, whatever I want to watch, all without leaving my couch. And I think that we have to be really, really aware of that draw and refocus ourselves on what the distinguishing element of live performance is. What makes live performance different? It's not the storytelling part, right? There are plots, there are beginning, middles, and ends, there are characters. It's the liveness, and it's the connection between artist and audience that cannot be reproduced on the screen. So I think that, again, it's a little bit like the social media thing. If we think we're going to go toe to toe with streaming content, we're going to lose. That's it. It's done before it even started. They have millions and millions and millions of dollars. But if we say, no, that's not even remotely what we are. We're not your leisurely experience on your couch. It's actually a to Z experience. You're going to come, we're going to say hi to you when you walk into the lobby, we're going to shake your hand, we're going to give you a hug if you want one, you're going to meet some people that you haven't seen in a long time, here's some good food, here's some conversation, we're going to have a show that actually comes off the stage and touches your neurons and engages your body. And then from there, we're going to meet you after the show and figure out if you liked it or if you didn't like it, or ask you what you thought about it, and add food. Thank you, Shell, yes. in the chat. Food, yes. more food. So that for me is really what we can offer that is different. If we try to just be HBO on stage, we're done.
Okay, interesting. Anyone have anything else they would like to add on that? I will say that the story of Kim's Convenience, of course, started as a fringe show, rejected by every major theater, and then it became a hit TV show. That I think that's a really telling example. I have been lobbying various people at the CBC because the CBC.
Sorry, that's a telling example of what?
Sorry?
It's a telling example of what? Well,
the play was a huge hit, and then they put it on television, and it became, I'd like to see, as some people are saying in the chat, I'd like to see more sort of interconnection between the TV audience and the theater audience. So in South Korea, for example, one of the reasons why South Koreans go and see South Korean movies is because there's a real but they have they have they have what's the word I'm looking for? You could only show 50%. 50% of screens have to be South Korean movies. That's one thing that they have that we don't have in Canada. But also there's a real interconnection between South Korean television and cinema. So if there's a hit TV show, they turn it into a movie right away. So people go and see that because they like the TV show. I'd like to see, as people were saying in the chat box, this is something they did in Britain for a long time. They said Play for Today was a series. And if there was a hit play like Abigail's Party by Mike Lee, they filmed it on a soundstage, sometimes just cheaply on videotape, but at least they captured it. That became a highly rated show. And people would then say, I've got to go see the theater because I want to see this live. So I don't understand why, for example, at the Fringe, why the CBC isn't the most popular show, original show, not a remount of something else, but original show at the Fringe, is then mounted for people to see. Years ago, they did an excellent production on the CBC of Balkanville, the David Fenario play. It's a great TV production of it. Why aren't we doing more of that to turn Canadian audiences on to theater? So they say, you know, I should have seen that live. We're not, in Quebec, they have this going on in Quebec. A lot of the French stage actors, Francophone stage actors, are appearing in Xavier Dolan's film or Denis Arcand's films. So you have this interplay between the cinema, the television, and the theater, which means that people are then eager to go and see it. If I really think we have to start lobbying the CBC like crazy to do more productions of hit plays. Kim's Convenience, I should have been, I think, an example to me.
I don't agree. I think that that's like, it's one example of something that happened that it's great. I think they're very different mediums that we're in. I think that also like commercial theater is awesome. It's important. It's part of the spectrum. It's really important for Benedict Cumberbatch to do Hamlet so that people learn about that. And it gets reach, but it's not necessarily what everyone does. And it's not necessarily what everyone wants to do. And this is where I come back to what is theater? Theater for certain artists isn't about a volume of people. It can be a one-to-one relationship. It's about a different kind of experience and a storytelling that is about relevance. And that's part of the thing. Like to Gideon's example, what Gideon explained was so right in terms of the competing with the couch, but it's also about us as content creators. We do have to up our game. You know, we're in an industry that's especially in Canada, that's relied on Shakespeare as its #1 selling playwright. And like, that's a problem because there's a limit to those plays. And people don't even know what the theater is. They think that that's what it should be, that they're supposed to dress up to come to this thing. It's not glitz and glamour all the time. It's relational. We actually have to resist the temptation, I think, to, as Gideon was saying, to try to replicate and emulate those film and TV industries and markets. They're very, very different. They're hugely important. They're hugely successful, and they have a very different export model. They have a very different reach, and they also have a friend, which is the internet, which we don't actually have. And that pandemic taught us that. The pandemic showed us that our work doesn't always translate. 97% of what is made does not translate to this flat screen because it misses people. And I think that it's really, the theater has always, film and TV have always been there. They've always been, and I would hesitate to say competitors, because we as creators are heavily influenced by them. They are inspirations, you know, they are what strike our imagination and help us to create worlds that are exciting and interesting and engaging. But we do what it can't, which is we engage the imagination in a way that goes beyond realism. And yet again, I think this is a problem in Canadian English-speaking theater, is a heavy reliance on realism and trying to be film and TV on stage. And that's not necessarily what everyone wants to do. So I vehemently disagree. I think, again, Kim's Convenience, it's great that happened. It's awesome. But that's not a model necessarily for people to pursue. And I think it's a dangerous one, because it's super rare, and it's that thing. I've forgotten his name. I wish I could remember it. I was at some Gideon, the guy. We were at that meeting with the minister, and he was the music guy. Oh man, he represented an organization of independent musicians, and he says to everyone, he goes, you know, the Canadian music industry is a great place to become rich, but it's a terrible place to earn a living. And I think that's true of the arts in Canada. It's really, and you see it in the chat. It's not the lottery. It's not film and TV, right? Like, film and TV is a great place to become rich. It's a really hard place to earn a living. And yeah, anyways, I'm going on to
No, first of all, I just want to say I completely agree with you. I know they're not the same thing. I'm not talking so much about competition. I'm talking about like a certain synergy that I see happening that's very exciting. Abigail's Party, if you haven't seen it, it's to me the greatest Mike Lee thing ever. It is not mainstream. It is a very unusual play. And the reason that most people in Britain actually know about it was because it was on television. And when they remounted the play, it was a huge hit a few years ago. I mean, it's a remarkable piece of work. I'm sorry, but Laura, you've had your hand up forever, so I want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, I do too.
Well, no, forever. It's just offering a different perspective in terms of, I think there is a place for recording and digitally disseminating work. I think, you know, it's that perspective of being in a large major center that is easy to forget about people living outside of major centers, thinking about people, you know, in remote communities. Of course, in some of those remote communities, even connectivity to the internet is challenging and difficult. But you know, just saying for us, through the pandemic, we were actually able to create work specifically created for online dissemination, and we're able to share those works with broad audiences, possibly, well, in fact, way more broadly than we could have done had we only shown them on the stage here in Ottawa. And so again, from that perspective of the Indigenous Theatre at the National Arts Centre with a mandate to serve a broad and diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities across this land, and looking to connect with international Indigenous artists as well, that is a gift, right? The ability to disseminate our work digitally. And I completely agree that it's not necessarily everything. We need to think about what it is that we're creating and the form and how it's going to be shared. But again, just to come back to the breathing hole, one of the things I again most proud of is the fact that, first of all, we did translate the entire first act into Tlingit, a dialect that is at risk. And you mentioned Shakespeare. I mean, so because of that translation, students in the three communities who speak that dialect are now able to study this play rather than Shakespeare. And, you know, we built the show to capture it digitally, and we'll be sharing it with those communities as well. That was part of the reciprocal agreement with the community in terms of telling the story. So I think, again, there's a large degree of possibilities in terms of what we produce, how we share it with the audience, and what we're defining as the stage. And I think that's even really what you're saying, Ravi. It's just, you know, the stage doesn't have to be, as we've thought about it forever, you know, the 800-seat proscenium theater. It can be wherever we make the theater and tell the stories.
Yeah, I would rather have seen Balconville live in Montreal, but the way I saw it was on television in this production I mentioned, and it was so well done that it made me a David Fenario fan and made one of my life goals to interview him, which I got to do for the CBC, and it turned me on to wanting to see more theater. So, like, I completely agree with you, Ravi. It's a singular experience, and we shouldn't be, you know, selling out for TV. But if TV can help us promote more people saying, wow, that happened on stage. That's really cool. I want to go and see live action performances. I think that could be a good thing. Sorry, Eva, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's a binary. I think that the really important conversation is what we started on about what is theater in our community. What is theater? Because those film and TV need us. They need the training that the actors get going through these, you know, they need the stories, like you say, Kim's Convenience became this Mambo Time, but that isn't a one-way trip. It's a holistic idea of the culture that we are building as Canadians in particular. And I say this as an American because I'm an immigrant, but the brilliance of Canada is its uniqueness in the world around multiple languages, multiple the diversity of the country, with the North being an entire world that is so little known to the rest of the world. That's an opportunity for us, and a true social democracy. For better or worse, it's one of the most functional ones in the world at the moment. And so there's a lot that we are and that what we need to do better as theater makers is say we're part of it all. We're not over here. We're part of the whole conversation, and you will miss out if you don't join in the part where you get to be there live. You're there in person, as Tony Kushner says. You come to the theater to witness the things that are the most beautiful, or too beautiful or too terrible to witness alone. You come for those stories. You come to be together around those things. And like, I love what you're saying, Laurie, about what is the stage. It could be, there's so much opportunity for us right now around that conversation, but we have to stop marginalizing ourselves in the cultural conversation. I think we're part of the whole culture.
Wow, that's a great Tony Kushner quote. I had never heard that. That's great. Ravi,
We absolutely are. I think the thing that I'm maybe responding to is that inevitably the disparity is money, right? And the vast majority of work that is done in the theater is probably like under the production budgets are under $25,000, $30,000, right? Those shows, those stories don't necessarily have access to the platforms that will accelerate them to those levels that we're talking about in terms of these cross pollinations. I agree with it in principle, but I think, again, it's one of those ways of thinking that constantly excludes the majority of creators, the majority of people working, just because of the access point, without even being aware of it. It's just the access point of how would that small fringe show even get considered to be, turned into a freaking whatever. And the reality of those fringe actors, if any of them got a fucking movie or TV thing, they would take it and they would abandon the show because they can get paid, because they're not getting paid. And the money disparity in our sectors is massive. And so I don't disagree with the overall point, but I just think that from my perspective, the vast majority of work would just never even be in the loop of that. And Kim's Convenience blew up because it was at Soul Pepper at a time, and there were people who were able to take it to a certain level. And it was many years in the making, but it's not everyone's going to get that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess I was being very kind of utopian in my thinking and hoping that perhaps television could be used to highlight unusual risk-taking shows, riskier shows, and say, look at this. This is so interesting. The people behind Atanarjat, which is now regarded as the greatest Canadian feature film ever made by most critics and academics in Canada, is that the filmmaker said, how do I take these Indigenous traditions and use film to tell the story? And he did it. So it's such a magnificent film. It's such a heart-wrenching film. It's incredible to watch. Anyway, I mean, we're speaking, I think, a lot of similar points. I mean, I see your points, Ravi. I just see the way that it's been done, the way that it was done for a long time in Britain. A lot of people were turned on to the theater because they saw something on BBC. Gideon, sorry, you had something that you were adding in the about Scotland that I thought was interesting.
No, just to say, there's a couple of interesting models of people who are thinking outside of traditional venues. I encourage everybody to go over to the National Theatre of Scotland's website. I don't know how well they execute, but their mission statement is really awesome, and it talks about making sure that theater lives in the pubs and the ferries and the backyards of everybody, and it's a beautiful proposition.
Are people going to do planning like hybrid Zoom live shows? Someone was saying that in the chat box. Is anyone planning to sort of do a hybrid like that, where some people could watch from home while others would be live?
We've done a hybrid that we're in the middle of for the whole season, which is, we've called it Theater for One. And we, over the pandemic, we brought 6 actors in, and they got to pick a monologue that they wanted to do and work on. And then I brought in 2 other directors and myself, and we filmed them with a film crew in the building in various places. And we put it online. We projected it in January on the big screen, like a thing. And then we're going to bring the actors back in the spring to do the monologues live, and then have the conversation of what's the difference of the experience. Because for me, you can't really, I don't understand. I don't know enough about, I'm not a filmmaker, so I don't know enough about how to take the thing that makes theater, because theater's words much of the time, not all the time, but certainly the theater that I grew up in it's a lot of words. And so film is images. It's fully an imagistic, the size of a script for a TV or a film is so different from the size of a script for a play most of the time. So I'm curious about the interface, and what do the actors want from it? What do they get from it? What can we offer up that isn't available in either film or television? What's the new idea, and what's the conversation we can start? So there are some things, and I think lots of people are doing lots of different things. There's been beautiful stuff throughout the pandemic, as Laurie was saying too, about the work they did with breathing holes. So I think the key is back to the notion of aesthetic courage, and not resting backwards, but looking forwards, and finding another set of continuously taking a risk. Yeah.
So somebody in the chat box wrote food, and used to be when I went to the Citadel, I would there was, I forget the name of it now. Forgive me, Daryl. But what was the restaurant? It was a very good restaurant in the Citadel. I used to go. So you went. It was part of the experience. Was you went, you had a really good meal, or maybe you had a drink after too. At the Centaur, of course, there's lots of great restaurants down in Old Montreal, so that also would be part of the experience. I'm just throwing this out there. Have any of you thought of a situation where people would come and have some food in the theater before they enter the theater, or that would be like part of the experience? Because that would actually probably get me down. I hate to say it, but like if you got a really good chef in there, I know that the prices would then have to go up significantly, right? So I'm being perhaps elitist, but if you had some really great food there, that probably get people down there as part of the experience.
Isn't that exactly what Ravi's doing with your show at Shaw right now? Like, I think making it part of that experience and part of that community is definitely super exciting.
Anyone else?
I'll just say, yeah. So the second part of our show is a community meal where you hear storytelling and everyone eats together. Part of that is because Mahabharata is such a Indian story, and so much of the culture is through food. I also did a show with my mom, and we served samosas on stage. Again, if you come to my parents' house, we would offer you food, and it's just a way to make it feel like you're part of the experience. Food is so much of food is part of how a lot of people receive and share stories.
Yeah, amazing.
I will just add that we opened with a community feast. Everybody came then and had stew prepared by the Indigenous chef who was resident at One Elgin, and we're hoping now that we might be able to get back to that. Start every year with a community feast. Everybody's welcome. Everybody's fed.
We
Amazing.
feed everybody on opening night. So Matthew, come on
Feed
down.
everybody on
There's
opening
always.
And when they come for rehearsal, have feast in the profile.
Actually, there's something that I was able to take part of here at Centaur that is so beautiful is our tech team makes a meal for the cast and crew on the last day before dress rehearsal. And Peter Cheroni is an amazing, we keep a stove in the basement they bring up, and he plans the menu around whatever the show is about and takes in all of the special dietary needs of all the people in the show. And it's such a great tradition for the company here to participate. And Peter and our production manager, Howard, cook the food, prepare it, put it out there. And it's great. I'm so sorry. I have to step away for something that's come up for me suddenly. So I want to thank you all so much for including me in this conversation. It's really inspiring and really important, and so lovely to see you all. And Ravi, big toi for the opening night. I'm so excited. I wish I could get down to, maybe I will. I'm still working on it. But
Edith,
all the
thank you
best.
so much. Thank you so much for coming and being part of it today, and your contributions. They were really interesting.
See you soon.
Yes. So we're coming to our last little section of today's chat. And I would like to ask all of you to tell us what you are most optimistic about, given all the challenges that we face, and given this sort of, I don't want to say post-pandemic, because of course everyone's always warning us that we're still in the pandemic, but as we move on, as we try to move into this new phase, and there have been moments you've talked about challenges, and there's also been moments you've talked about great things happening. So please, could people talk a little bit about what you're seeing that really excites you in this post-pandemic period of innovation and reinvention? Gideon?
Yeah, I'm really optimistic. I'm optimistic about a lot. I mean, it's hard. It's really, really hard work right now. And looking at the 100 or so people that we had on the call, and so many familiar names in there, I think we have to support each other and congratulate each other and thank each other for doing the hard work. But what I'm optimistic about is that all of the excuses, all of the things that were kind of needed to be that kind of stood in the way for so long, they're all out the window now. There are the image that I think of is, after a forest fire, there is new growth. And I think that we're really in a period where so much of what we have held on to and been afraid to let go of was taken from us, and now we've got to see what is possible. So that means the kinds of stories we're telling on stage, who's telling those stories, the voice of young people, which is emerging so strongly and so in such an interesting way, the forms, the people who are stepping into leadership roles, even the possibilities of technology or fighting technology as a position for our sector. I'm really optimistic about the fact that there's no more slow trickle. It's just got to happen, or we've got to go away.
Interesting. Lori?
Oh my gosh. So I think I am often teased for being optimistic, and I will admit that there's a lot going on right now that is really challenging even my optimism. I mean, we haven't talked about, I'm as I said, I'm speaking from Ottawa today. The traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. It's a city where I grew up that always felt very safe, and it is currently feeling really not safe. And the violence that has been just apparent and just hanging over the streets with the occupation of the truckers and the violence really that was just present in social media primarily, in and around an event here that my colleagues at English Theatre hosted called the Blackout Night, and around a production of Is God Is. I'm really fighting hard to retain that optimism, and noting that it is really hard right now. I think people are really hurting. I think they're afraid because of the impact of the last 3 years. And I think coming to theater, coming to our spaces, being with people in person is taking a great deal of courage. And I think, that artists, as creators, as people who thrive on that connectivity, it is a really challenging time for us, and it has been a really challenging time. It feels like maybe the light is breaking, and that people are not quite as afraid to gather. I'm hoping that trend continues. I am encouraged, of course, by the demand and the interest for the work that we're producing here at Indigenous Theatre, and the interest in and recognition of Indigenous knowledge and experience. Stories we've been telling forever are finally suddenly being heard. And in that, even though it's been a lot of work and a lot of hard work to get here, that of course is reason for optimism. But I do want to recognize that it's really hard right now. It's really hard right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Ravi? Ravi, do you have anything you want to add?
I was thinking.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I feel like Gideon and Lori said it very well. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Daryl?
Yeah, I agree. I think the the combination of the optimism and just how eloquently Lori expressed the challenges that are ahead, both in for artists creating theater, or just as we try to gather again. We certainly our front of house staff right now, like the challenges they face daily with very angry patrons, and with the sort of violence that's being brought towards them in a way that we haven't experienced before is quite a thing to navigate. But I think the way that going back to the just original questions, right? Like how Ravi pointed out, the sort of why of why we make theater, or how we make theater, or Lori saying, what is a stage? Like being able to go back to those questions right now is something that gives me some optimism, and the sort of the ability to look at process and how we make things, that it's not one size fits all. Or Gideon pointed out sort of the nimbleness of being able to just cancel a show. If there's a problem, just cancel the show and then do the show the next day. Like that, we're able to be much more nimble than we thought we were as a large organization before. Those kinds of things give me some optimism that we're like, hey, maybe it's not important that the play happens tonight. Maybe the process or the human beings involved are much more important than actually just doing the show tonight. So the openness to that kind of conversation now gives me a little bit of hope, for sure.
Yeah, these are fraught times, but speaking to all of you does give me optimism, because I feel like there's a lot of forward thinking and progressive thinking and expansive reflection about what the theater can be in Canada, and so that gives me a lot of hope. and now I'm really feel like I need to get out and go to the theater a lot more. I haven't been doing it, of course, because of the pandemic. So I have to get back in there. I have to go see Steve's show. And Ravi, I'd love to come see your show. That's a little more of a schlep for me, but I'd love to come and see it.
Come.
Sounds amazing.
We'll welcome you with open arms.
It sounds amazing. Okay, well, I really want to thank everyone on behalf of Actors Equity and thank Actors Equity for inviting me here. It was really an honor to be moderating this panel. It was a really great experience and really, really interesting. And I'm assuming this will all be posted on YouTube so we can go look at it again because it's been really fascinating.
That's great. Thank you so much, Matthew. I just want to also thank all the panelists. I'd like to thank Gideon and Daryl and Ida and Ravi and Lori and Matt for today's discussion. I also want to send a shout out to our ASL interpreters, Francine and Tyler. Thank you so much for everything you do to provide greater access to this conversation. And just a reminder, if you have missed any of our previous workshops, they are available on Equity's YouTube channel. So this one will be posted, and there are other ones already there. I'll just another reminder to those of you who are attending, please take a minute to fill out the survey that will come to you if it hasn't arrived already, and give us some guidance on what we can provide for you for the future with these workshops. On behalf of everybody at Equity and our panelists, I bid you all a fond farewell. Thank you for this great conversation.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody, and talk to you soon.